The calm night over the ocean was suddenly torn apart, not by a natural storm, but by hundreds of streaks of fire, hundreds of deadly trajectories, shooting up simultaneously from the sea surface. Not one, not 10, but 200. It was 2 a.m. tactical time. At secret coordinates, the destroyers of the Arleigh Burke-class and Virginia-class fast attack submarines of the U.S. 7th Fleet simultaneously opened their vertical launch hatches. 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles, the lone wolves of the sea, were launched in absolute radio silence. Their targets were not on land. Their target was a massive naval task force, unlike any seen before. The most powerful fleet China had ever deployed was gathering at an extremely sensitive coordinate, only a few dozen nautical miles from a close U.S. ally. The ultimatum had been ignored. The red line had been crossed. Washington had made its decision. The Pentagon had pressed the button. This was not a warning strike. This was a preemptive annihilation. The whole world held its breath. The countdown had begun. This game of chess began not with a gunshot, but with a stroke of a pen, a declaration, and a show of force from Beijing. Beijing, in a move that shook the entire Pacific, they unilaterally declared a new air defense identification zone. But this time, it didn't just cover disputed rocky islands. This time, their line on the map extended over key international shipping routes. Essentially, it was an act of strangulation, an attempt to turn the South China Sea into a private pond. Literally, to enforce that claim, they didn't send Coast Guard ships. They sent their most elite forces, a combat strike fleet led by 2 Type 055 destroyers, the pride of the Chinese Navy, hailed as the world's finest destroyers, with a displacement of over 12,000 tons, equipped with 112 vertical launch cells. Following them were 4 Type 052D destroyers, the Aegis-style Guardians, China's version of the Aegis system, accompanied by numerous escort and supply ships. They did not hide. They moved proudly and openly. Their purpose was clear: to lock down the strait. Any commercial or military ship passing through had to ask for permission. In Washington, the long-established observers tracked every move. Analysts called it a closing trap. If the U.S. failed to act, the salami slicing would become a complete swallowing of U.S. credibility. America's role as guarantor of maritime freedom would be worth nothing. The U.S. president faced 3 options. 1. Issue a protest statement, a meaningless gesture that Beijing expected. 2. Send carrier strike groups to confront them, a dangerous escalation scenario that could easily lead to miscalculation and full-scale war. 3. Launch a military strike, limited but effective enough to deter and inflict serious damage without crossing the nuclear red line. They chose option 3. The decision was made. The fleet must be neutralized, but there was a hard rule. No strikes on mainland China. Any missile flying into Chinese territory could be mistaken for a strategic nuclear attack. The battle had to stay offshore. This was a boundary test, a poker game worth trillions of dollars. The plan was named Poseidon's Wrath. The goal wasn't to sink everything, but to break their will and destroy the fleet's core combat capability. 200 Tomahawk missiles were assigned the mission, and that night, the firestorm began. 200 Tomahawks, the latest Block V variants, flying at extremely low altitude. They didn't fly like a flock of birds. They flew like a pack of wolves, splitting into multiple groups, concealed within the radar clutter of the sea surface. Each missile, worth over $2 million, was a precision trajectory computing machine. They did not all fly the same route. The U.S. command system had programmed them for a perfect storm attack scenario, a flawless strike. They would reach their targets from 8 different directions, almost simultaneously. On board the Type 055 destroyers, confidence still filled the air. Their active phased array radar, the Type 346B, or even superior to America's Spy 1 system. But that night, it had been silent for too long. When the radar screens suddenly lit up, it was already too late. Targets. Multiple directions, the combat officer shouted. Alarms blared frantically. The HHQ, 9 air defense systems. The Hongqi, 9 missiles aboard the Type 055S and Type 052DS, automatically activated. Launchers spun into firing dozens of missiles. In desperate interception attempts, they managed to stop maybe 50, perhaps even 20. But how? When they had only seconds to react, it was a downpour, a rain of steel and explosives. The first Tomahawk didn't aim for the hull. It went straight for the eyes, the Type 346B radar array. It obliterated the electronics, turning billions of dollars worth of equipment into smoking scrap. The Type 055, pride of the Chinese Navy, was instantly blinded. Just a second later, the second missile, then the third and fourth, slammed directly into the forward missile compartment. A massive secondary explosion followed. The compressed detonation force of the Tomahawk warheads resonated with the unlaunched Chinese missiles, creating hell itself, a floating inferno. The 12,000-ton destroyer was ripped apart from within. Steel screamed. The proud Type 055 split in half and began to sink in less than 5 minutes. The remaining Type 055 met the same fate. The smaller Type 052DS were torn apart even faster. In that moment, the calm sea turned into a blazing graveyard of steel. When dawn broke, only wreckage remained, oil slicks and the silence of death. The entire task force had been wiped out, but Washington's intent behind the strike was far more strategic than just sinking ships. First, the U.S. didn't only destroy hardware, it destroyed the credibility of Chinese weapons. They had proven to the entire world that the so-called invincible air defense system Beijing boasted about had utterly failed against a calculated saturation attack, completely overwhelmed. The pride of the Type 055 had turned out to be fragile after all. Second, the U.S. demonstrated a core naval doctrine. No surface fleet, no matter how modern, can survive without absolute and continuous air support from the mainland or from carrier strike groups. Otherwise, it's nothing more than a moving target, an expensive prey waiting for cruise missiles. China was completely caught off guard. They had prepared for diplomatic protests. They had prepared for U.S. ships shadowing them. But never had they anticipated a preemptive strike, so devastating, precise, and swift. They had underestimated the resolve of the Pentagon. Beijing had lost the first round, but the game was far from over. The fury had just begun. The entire world held its breath. Every command center, from Brussels to Moscow, from New Delhi to Tokyo, was glued to their screens, monitoring, watching every faint electromagnetic signal from mainland China. They waited for a thunderous retaliation. They waited for ballistic missile launchers to come online. They waited for the DF-21D carrier killers and the DF-26 Guam killers to roar off their launch pads. They waited for a full-scale cyber attack that could cripple the entire 7th Fleet. They waited for a fierce statement from Beijing and a call for total mobilization. But nothing happened. Silence. 3 hours. For hours. A heavy, dreadful silence, tight as a drawn wire, more terrifying than an immediate counterattack. Washington knew perfectly well this was not acceptance of defeat. This was preparation for a calculated retaliation. China was letting its war machine begin to awaken, according to a scenario they had prepared long ago. And then, it happened. The retaliation didn't come from the mainland. Zhang Nanhai had anticipated this situation. They knew the U.S. was waiting for them to launch ballistic missiles, to use it as a pretext to escalate the conflict to a higher level, a level for which China was not yet ready. No, the counterstrike came from two directions the U.S. had overlooked, or at least where it appeared weaker. First, from deep within the mainland's secret bases, 10H, 6K strategic bombers took off simultaneously. The gods of war, as they called themselves, carrying their most fearsome weapon, the YJ-12 Eagle Strike 12 hypersonic anti-ship missile. Each H-6K could carry several of them. This was China's own saturation strike, a barrage even deadlier than the Tomahawk, because its speed exceeded Mach 3 in the terminal phase. Second, from beneath the deep ocean, Type 093B nuclear attack submarines, the improved Shang class, which had been lying in wait at tactical positions for weeks, began to move. They had received the signal. They began the hunt. What was Beijing's true objective? They weren't naive. They knew that finding and destroying a U.S. carrier strike group, protected by multi-layered air defenses, early warning aircraft, and Aegis-equipped escorts, was a near-suicidal mission. Their goal was more practical and deeply personal. They wanted payback. An eye for an eye. The targets of the H-6KS and Type 093BS were the U.S. destroyers and submarines that had launched the 200 Tomahawks. They wanted to send a clear message. Whoever pulls the trigger must pay in blood. They wanted to hunt down the wolves from the previous night and break their fangs. The H-6K formations flew low, hugging the horizon, trying to stay below U.S. radar detection. The Type 093B submarines moved with chilling silence, sliding into firing positions. Torpedoes and anti-ship missiles were armed for launch. China believed the Alabama-class ships, having already fired all their Tomahawk missiles, were now empty, at their most vulnerable state. But that was the bait. This was the real chessboard the Pentagon had set up. They had anticipated this counterstrike. In fact, they had wanted this retaliation, as the H-6K squadrons were eagerly flying toward their designated targets, high above them, at an altitude, an angle their radars couldn't detect. The Phantoms appeared. They emitted no signals, no radar pings. They flew in complete radio silence. F-35C Lightning IIs had launched from U.S. carriers, while F-22 Raptors had taken off from nearby Allied bases. They had already been in the battle space for hours. They hadn't appeared from... They had been waiting since the war began. The fight began. Without a single gunshot. Without a single chase. One F-35C, flying at the edge of the H-6K formation, used its infrared, electro-optical targeting system, its divine eye, to track the heat signatures of dozens of H-6 Engineers from hundreds of miles away. The F-35 pilot didn't need to turn on radar. He didn't need to provoke the prey. He simply watched. Meanwhile, the F-22 Raptors, the kings of the sky, used their AESA radars, with ultra-low probability of interception, to paint a perfect electronic picture of the enemy formation, without triggering a single Chinese warning system. This wasn't a dogfight. This was high-tech slaughter. A network-centric war. The F-35 and F-22 pilots didn't fire a shot. They were the conductors of the battlefield. Target data, positions, speed, and heading were detected and compiled by the F-35s and F-22s. Then transmitted through the Link 16 data network, transmitted directly to the fleet's command brain, the Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Still fully loaded with air defense missiles, were hundreds of nautical miles away. This is the doctrine of integrated combat capability. An officer aboard an Aegis ship looks at the screen, where all targets have already been marked. He presses the button. Hundreds of miles away from the battlefield, the VLS hatches on the U.S. warships open once again. But this time, not Tomahawks. This time, it's SM. This is the true, game-changing weapon. It's both an air defense missile and a ballistic missile interceptor, capable of striking enemy aircraft from an unimaginable distance. The SM-6 missiles soar into the upper atmosphere, then dive down at hypersonic speed, guided by the very F-35s and F-22s silently observing from afar. On board the H-6K bombers, tragedy strikes. Their missile warning systems suddenly scream. But not from the front, not from below, but from above. They only have a few seconds. Too late. The SM-6s slam into their targets with absolute precision. One by one, 10 H-6K bombers explode in the sky. Giant fireballs erupt, incinerating the EJ-12 missiles they carried. The H-6Ks are wiped out, without ever knowing where they were targeted from. They're erased, before they even reached the OJ-12 launch range. Meanwhile, USP-8 Poseidon anti-submarine aircraft, which had been tracking the ships of the Type 093B class since they left port, begin releasing sonobuoys and Mark 54 light torpedoes. The underwater hunt unfolds swiftly. In less than 30 minutes, China's counterstrike is completely crushed. They lose dozens of main bomber aircraft and possibly several valuable submarines. Beijing has lost the second round, lost in humiliation, defeated by technology, defeated by tactics. But while the US is still reveling in victory and its technological superiority, they forgot one fundamental thing. They forgot about desperation. They forgot that, when a superpower is cornered and humiliated before the entire world, it will never accept defeat. It will escalate. This time, it's no longer the H-6K bombers, no longer the submarines. Deep inside underground command bunkers in Beijing, the final order. The most terrifying command has been issued. Female brigades of the Strategic Rocket Force receive the coordinates. China realizes it has lost the conventional battle. They can't stand against the F-35s. They can't break through the SM-6 shield. Now they are forced to change the game, forced to play the one card that the entire world, even the United States, fears most. At secret bases scattered across 6 regions, the ground begins to tremble. Silo hatches open wide. Massive launch vehicles rise upright, with their missiles poised. Dozens of DF-21D carrier killers. And even the deadly DF-20 SIXS. These aren't cruise missiles. They are ballistic missiles, rising into space, then plunging down at unimaginable speeds. Mach 10, even Mach 15, carrying maneuverable warheads, designed to evade every defense system. Their targets are not the exhausted Allabird destroyers. Their target is the very heart of the 7th Fleet, the symbol of American power in the Pacific, the Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, the USS Ronald Reagan, patrolling what was thought to be a safe zone. But now, nowhere is safe anymore. The moment those missiles leave their silos, the South China Sea crisis officially becomes the most dangerous confrontation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Aboard U.S. warships, the air turns heavy. Ballistic missile alert. Incoming ballistic missiles. This is not a drill. The alarm sirens tear through the night. U.S. early warning satellites have picked up enormous heat trails coming from China's 6 regions. The moment they were launched, the trajectory computation systems calculate in seconds, and the results appear on the screens. They are aimed straight at them. Everything aloft becomes a staged spectacle, a ballet of life and death, choreographed by combat software and executed in steel. The Ticonderoga-class cruisers and the Arleigh Burke destroyers, Flight IIA and Flight IIA variants, and Flight 3, ships equipped with the Aegis baseline system. Ships 9 and 10 are the defenders. They maneuver, forming a wall of steel around the carrier. The captain of the lead Ticonderoga shouts to activate the entire system. This is the decisive moment. The Spy 1 and Spy 6 radars run at full power, scanning the skies, searching for the tiny dots plunging in from the edge. Space has locked on the targets. Multiple targets. Unpredictable trajectories. The maneuvering MAV warheads of the DF-21D are dancing. They twist and turn to evade being tracked and launched at from the VLS cells. The SM-3 interceptors are launched again and again. A giant roar surges upward. They don't aim at ships. They aim at space. This is a kinetic kill battle. SM-3s climb at terrifying speed, break out of the atmosphere, and use their own kinetic energy to smash into the incoming warheads. High above the sky, silent detonations appear. Streaks of light flash as metal collides with metal at supersonic speeds. The U.S. succeeds. They intercept the first one, the second, the 5th, the 10th. The Aegis displays show rows of targets neutralized. It seems the shield is holding, but China played a saturation move. They knew they would lose many missiles. They only needed one to get through. And one got through. A DF-21D warhead may have used a more complex trajectory, or was launched a second later. It pierced through the SM-3 interception layer, re-entering the atmosphere. The lower-tier defenses are activated. SM-6 missiles, then ESSMs, launch like rain from the escort ships. Phalanx CIWS systems spin their barrels, forming a final wall of 20mm fire, but its speed is far too great. The warhead glows like a meteor plunging down. It's not aiming for the carrier. It targets the largest radar signature, the greatest threat to it. The lead Ticonderoga-class cruiser, at the head of the formation, the very ship that launched waves of SM-3s, the ship that saved the carrier. It fulfilled its duty as a guardian, and paid the price. The kinetic impact is not a Hollywood-style explosion. It's a perfect penetration. A warhead weighing hundreds of kilograms dives at Mach 10 speed, turning the 9,000-ton cruiser into a living hell, its steel hull torn apart. Fire and smoke erupt from a massive hole, right amidships. The ship doesn't sink immediately, but it's dead, knocked out of the fight, heavily damaged, with real casualties. Blood is spilled on the carrier's deck. Silence fills the command room. They have won, but also lost. They intercepted a ballistic missile strike, but lost a major warship. A defensive triumph, but also a strategic defeat. In that moment, both sides suddenly realize they are standing on the brink of nuclear war. All-out war is just one step away. Beijing has proven its point. Its missiles can hit a moving warship, even one from the US Navy, under the strongest protection. They've avenged the loss of their Type 055 fleet. Washington has also proven its point. Its Aegis system can truly operate. It can intercept ballistic missiles. And they've shown they're willing to accept losses. The price was far too high. China lost a blue water fleet. The US lost a major frontline cruiser. Both sides proved they were ready to pull the trigger. Beijing realized it wasn't ready for a war that it couldn't control. Escalation gives way to a terrifying silence over the South China Sea. No more gunfire. No more missiles. The match abruptly halts. Almost immediately, the Kremlin, then Brussels, then Tokyo, all call for an immediate ceasefire. The United Nations convenes urgently. But the world doesn't wait. The game has already stopped. It didn't stop because of diplomats. It stopped because of soldiers, because of captains, men who had just witnessed hell, through their optical sights, men who had just realized. The next step wouldn't be conventional missiles. The next step would be the nuclear button. Beijing doesn't declare surrender. It never admits defeat. But its military operations suddenly come to a halt. The remaining warships from other fleets hurriedly withdraw to base. The air defense identification zone it declared collapses on its own, not on paper, but in the steel smoke of 200 Tomahawk missiles, and in the wreckage of the fallen H-6K bombers. Silence falls once more. China lost an elite fleet. The US lost a major cruiser, an exchange neither side wanted. But both were forced to accept. America has redrawn the red line, not with ink, but with molten steel. It accepted the risk of escalation beyond reason, took a punch to the face to preserve the old order. The South China Sea is momentarily calm. But it's a dreadful calm. A peace built on the wrecks of ships, and the fear of total war. The first and most brutal lesson has been learned. Deterrence is not about the weapons you own. Not about how many DF-21DS sit on your launchers. Deterrence is the willingness to use them. It's determination, firing 200 Tomahawks before the enemy even finishes a cup of coffee. The second lesson, modern war is a war of data. The F-35s won without firing a single shot. They won because they saw first and guided the SIXS. Whoever controls the information network controls the battlefield. And the final lesson, the fragility of peace, just one miscalculation away, just one warhead, one more DF-21D breaking through and hitting the carrier, just one delayed phone call on the hop, a few seconds late, and the entire Pacific could have been engulfed in conflict, from which no one could turn back. In the brutal chess game of superpowers, there is no room for innocence. Sovereignty and independence are not granted by words. They're guaranteed only by real power, by strategic clarity and iron will, by the readiness to fight for every last inch, to defend the seas our ancestors bled for.